And next up, traditional employment in the most basic understanding of a 9-to-5 is very quickly changing shape as the average employee has shifted its career needs and goals. Momentum Corporate has a new report which reveals some of these shifts, and they include popular buzzwords. You've probably already heard about the gig economy and the great resignation. Well, I'm now joined by Dumo Mbethe, CEO at Momentum Corporate, for more. Let's start about talking about the gig economy. It's something that I'm quite interested in, quite passionate about, actually. And I noted in your report that almost half of employers have stated that they are looking to recruiting only contractors or a mix of contract and permanent employees. I mean, this is really giving grounding to the whole gig economy. What were the main reasons underpinning this?
Good evening, Tanya, and a very good evening to all your viewers. So this piece of research, which we call Partnership Connect, we release once a year. And just to put it in context, we interviewed 117 business leaders across 30 industries, 117 financial advisors, and 502 employees across South Africa. And of that population, quite a significant portion of those employers are now indicating that hybrid models, firstly, are the future, and also hybrid in a sense now that employers are really looking for flexibility in terms of the employer-employee relationship. So we are finding that there are more organizations that are opting to utilize contract-based type employment and really on a need basis or on a just-in-time basis. Learnerships also seem to be, another direction that is being taken by businesses that are really facing significant financial constraints. And now this has also been met by an increasing need, especially from millennials who are looking for variety in their work experiences. And so, the supply is now meeting the demand. And it does mean from an employee benefits perspective, we now need to start thinking very differently about this merging world of, employer-sponsored compulsory benefits and voluntary benefits, which are actually selected at an individual level. Yeah. We need to be a lot more accommodating of this evolving landscape.
And that was exactly what I wanted to ask about, because employment, by definition, or by traditional definition, was all about stability. And now what you're basically saying is that employees are looking for variety and flexibility, and employers are also looking for flexibility in terms of their workforce. So the traditional employment contract and structure, how does that work in terms of employee benefits and also in terms of how the relationship functions contractually? What is changing in that regard?
So I would say, Tanya, the main change, which I think is also being quite well supported through some of the regulatory shifts we're seeing at a national level, is around at least ensuring that as people are shifting and changing jobs, the assets that they've been accumulating in their retirement funds are actually preserved. We've got a high prevalence of basically money flowing out of pension funds when people move jobs, and that leads to very poor outcomes when people get to retirement. So if you imagine that someone will change employers, let's say 7 times in their career, and now those are 7 instances of an outflow from the retirement fund. So the current discussions around some level of compulsory preservation, whilst allowing some early access to a portion of the funding, I think in the long term, starts to create a bit more stability in what is quite, a volatile landscape. And then it also becomes quite important for employers to actually focus on financial education of their employees to ensure that they're able to navigate successfully.
So does this perhaps provide the breeding ground for new products entirely when it comes to employee benefits? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, look, I mean, when we asked the employees themselves what they would like to see, it was quite interesting because there was a plethora of needs. I mean, and as South Africans, we like to see high investment returns, but we've got very low appetite for risk. So it was interesting to see things like cryptocurrencies popping up. And I mean, currently that definitely does not, fit into the framework. But some of your most standard, actually, products around health cover, retirement savings, tax-free savings, and how those can now play a role were actually brought up by the employees themselves. So I think it's probably more around the flexibility that is introduced into the solutions and the portability that's introduced in the solutions than perhaps creating entirely new solutions.
And it's interesting that you bring up South Africa and our need for, our risk averseness. The Great Resignation, I mean, Beyonce sang about it. How much of a reality is it here in South Africa?
Yeah, the Great Resignation is extremely prevalent. And perhaps if I can just touch on something we saw in the research. I mean, 19% of the employees we interviewed were already considering resigning or in the process of, and 21% were actually unsure. So you can imagine 40% who were basically either unsure or ready to resign. And this is, something that employers really need to take into account. And here what we see are issues around low morale, especially in post-retrenchment workplaces where employers have downsized their workforces in response to the impact of COVID-19 and the lockdowns. And what tends to happen is that those who remain now need to pick up the slack from the reduction in the workforce. So that has really placed significant pressure on the ecosystem. And perhaps another insight here, Tanya, is that normally as employers we want to believe that employees leave our organizations for better opportunities, higher salaries. And I think what is also clear in our research is that a significant reason for employees leaving is actually around culture and also, the quality of leaders. So we should never underestimate the impact of culture and the impact of how we show up as leaders on the ability to retain talent, especially in this environment.
Sure, I feel like this is a whole different discussion that deserves a lot more time, but unfortunately that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was Dumo Mbethe, CEO at Momentum Corporate. Well, now